All right, well, it's a blessing to be here this morning. I enjoyed our time together so far. Felt like we were running out of time for the passages and the things we were talking about, both the devotional. Thank you, Josiah, for that. And then Sunday school as well was just very good. I thought I enjoy numbers as in mathematical numbers, but I realized that I certainly don't know very much about how they all fit in. And that was fascinating how you put all that together, Tim. Thank you for that. Looking forward to hearing some more about the passages there in Daniel. Happy Father's Day to each one. I just want to wish that to each of you dads out there. I do not have a Father's Day message prepared as such. However, I have a quote here from a card that my children gave me this morning. It says this: "A father is neither an anchor to hold you back, nor a sail to take us there, but a guiding light whose love shows us the way." And I hope that each of us dads can be that this morning. More of a guiding light, not someone not holding our children back, nor thinking we can take them there, but just simply an example of truth. I really thought that was fitting. If you want to listen to a good Father's Day message, go back on our YouTube channel and listen to the message that Lonnie Beachy preached here about 2 months ago. And it was a Father's Day it was a father's message to the fathers. This morning I'd like to continue in the Gospel of John, and I'm ready for John chapter 9. You can turn with me there. There's an interesting, quite fascinating story here I'd like to look at this morning. In June of 2004, during construction work to prepare a large water pipe south of Jerusalem's Temple Mount, at the southern end of the ridge, known as the City of David, archaeologists Ronnie Reich and Eli Shukran identified two ancient stone steps. And I was reading somewhere that if there is an excavation going on in Israel, they first of all need to hire archaeologists as well to be a part of that in case something shows up. And apparently that's what happened here. They identified two ancient stone steps. Further excavation revealed that they were part of a monumental pool from the Second Temple period, the period in which Jesus lived. The structure that Reich and Shukran discovered was the Pool of Siloam. This morning's message is kind of centered around the Pool of Siloam and what happened there. Archaeology, once again, proved the accuracy of Scripture. Before 2004, it was uncertain as to where the Pool of Siloam was located. And I'm sure many skeptics would have said, well, maybe this is a detail that the Bible doesn't have correct. But here, once again, archaeology proved the accuracy of Scripture. And I find that fascinating as I think about the message we heard through Sunday school about the times and the dates. And you have to wonder how this will all play out in the end times and what those dates may actually be. But anyway, getting back to the Pool of Siloam, this pool was close to the temple. And it was likely, very likely, that this was the pool that the priests would draw water from for the temple rituals. Its water was used for a special ceremony during the Feast of the Tabernacles. And let me go back just a bit. This was not just ordinary water as such. The Pool of Siloam was constructed by Hezekiah to hold water that was channeled in from the Gihon springs. Hezekiah was at a time when war was imminent. And one of the problems within the city of David was that there was no fresh water there. And so Hezekiah set to work to take care of this problem, and they chiseled through 2,000 feet of solid rock to construct a tunnel to carry the water in underneath the wall into the city. It is believed to have been the only source of living water inside the city walls. And so back to the priests using this water as for their temple rituals. This water was used for a special ceremony during the Feast of Tabernacles. And I've been really fascinated with Michael's messages on the last two that he did, and connecting the feasts and making parallels. But the Feast of Tabernacles was a yearly feast, if I understand it correctly, that was somewhat in celebration of God bringing the children of Israel out of Egypt. But the priest would bring this water up, and as the crowds of people were there, they chanted what is called the Hallel, Psalm 113 to 118. The priest would pour out the water on the west side of the altar, and other priests poured out a drink offering of wine on the east side of the altar. And this was probably to illustrate where it says in Isaiah, "With joy you will draw waters from the well of salvation." So just a little tidbit of Old Testament history there, and some notes that I got. I didn't put all of this together myself. It was from a article I was reading. But so that they had this 8-day feast, or 8-day ceremony around the Feast of Tabernacles. So they did this the first 7 days. On the 8th day, the final day of the feast, this ritual for some reason was not repeated. But it is noted, and it's interesting, that on this day, on the last and greatest day of the festival, Jesus stood up here when Jesus was on earth, and he said in a loud voice, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them." And on the one day of the feast, when no water was poured, Jesus stood up and filled the gap. The water that Christ offers, the Holy Spirit, I believe is better than the waters of Siloam. In offering the water of life, Jesus identified himself with the rock in the wilderness that gave water to the Hebrews. So just an interesting little tidbit about the pool of Siloam here. When blind men see. And I find it fascinating, the dialogue between Jesus and the people, and of course this blind man, and how they took all of this. I think there's lessons and parallels for us to learn from it this morning. If we go back to chapter 8, we'll see how Jesus was accused of blasphemy. And this blasphemy was surrounding the statement that he made where he said, "Before Abraham was, I am." And they were saying that Jesus was placing himself up next to God and said, "This is blasphemy, man cannot do that." And because of that, they cast him out. They wanted to stone him. But Jesus passed away and went from their midst. Was this in sequence here? We're not sure, but it's very likely that as Jesus had passed away, possibly the next day as he was coming back, as he was passing by, is when this story may have taken place. I'm going to read the first 7 verses. We'll look at it some, and then we'll go down over the dialogue between Jesus and the people there, and then we're going to finish up with the last 5 or 6 verses where, again, Jesus speaks and dialogues with the man that he healed. In John chapter 9, verse 1, "And as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, 'Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?' Jesus answered, 'Neither have this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. I must work the works of him that sent me. While it is day, the night cometh, when no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world.' When he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay, and said unto him, 'Go wash in the pool of Siloam,' which is, by interpretation, sent. He went his way, therefore, and washed, and came seeing." So it's interesting, as Jesus was passing by, he saw this man. He says he was blind from birth. He didn't just pick any blind man to heal that day, but it was a man that had never saw before. He had never been physically able to see. And the disciples immediately, they see this, and they ask the question, "Master, well, who sinned? Was it this man or was his parents?" Kind of like making the assumption there must be sin involved here, and because of this person was blind. They were asking the question, in a sense, who really is responsible for what happens? And in this case, was it the father or the mother, or was it the children? And I think this is a little the way we are wired as well. We are wired to blame something for the circumstances that we face. The list of questions we can ask about any given circumstance are endless. And I don't know what your list of questions this morning might be. You might be thinking, well, why did God give me cancer right now? Or for Danny, maybe, why did God give me shingles? Why do I have to deal with that on top of the cancer? Maybe you're wondering why your heart isn't strong enough to do what you'd like to do this morning. Or maybe it's even more basic than that. Maybe you're wondering, well, we were traveling home last Sunday night and a deer jumped out in front of us. I was like, what is that all about? Dented the one corner of the vehicle. Nothing really we could do about it, but couldn't have God, kind of orchestrated things to go more smoothly? Or this past week, our dog, my daughter's pet, laid underneath the wheel of our truck, and I didn't realize it. Jumped in the truck, started it up. I wasn't in a hurry. She had plenty of time to move, but she chose not to. Drove over her. Why do these things happen? Questions like that. Why do they happen? Is God trying to punish us for something? Is God trying to get our attention? And while I'm not suggesting that the law of sowing and reaping is not in effect and does not happen, and while this question, I believe, was fair enough and is in some ways a question that humanity continues to ask, and while there are a lot of questions that we don't have good answers for, we could the observations today that there's babies that are born to drug addicts and suffer the consequences of their parents. And the whys of cancer, and the why of this, and the why of that. For what reason does all of this happen? I find it interesting that Jesus teaches them a new perspective on life and what happens. And maybe we should say, too often we're probably asking the wrong question. But Jesus teaches them a new perspective on life and what happens. Do we understand this morning that nothing happens by chance? Everything has a purpose. And while some things may happen because of poor choices, yes, God desires to use the circumstances we face and turn them into something beautiful. And so he told them, neither hath this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. So rather than immediately jumping to the sin thing and thinking that we have done something wrong when circumstances arise, let's look at what Jesus said and realize, well, this may just be another opportunity for us to glorify him in some way. Even in the midst of our infirmity, even in the midst of our affliction, may God be glorified and manifested through this. And yeah, we don't understand, and I don't believe that we will always understand why things happen the way they do. If we can look to him and bring glory to him and understand that it is for a greater purpose, I believe he will be glorified. I think our response simply needs to be one of obedience and action. As we understand God's purpose, as we understand what he is calling for us, we respond in obedience and action. And then Jesus continued to kind of make an observation. I'm not quite sure how all this fits into here, more than I believe Jesus realized that his time on earth was short and that he had a certain range of things to accomplish. And he simply said, I must work the works of him that sent me. While it is day, the night cometh when no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. There's a sense of urgency here. And I think it's good for us to have this sense of urgency as well. As we have opportunity, may we be and do what Jesus calls us to do. Galatians 6, verse 9 and 10 says, and let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. And I'm blessed this morning to be a part of a group of people that do this and do it well. But let's never lose the sense of urgency that our work here on earth is still not finished while we are here. And this is true for all of us, but I say that especially to our older people this morning, our widows. There is still something here for you to do, and God has you here for a reason. Never lose sight of that. We still have opportunity here. Then we'll get into the story of how Jesus actually healed this blind man. took compassion on this man, but he kind of took an interesting little route here to actually heal this person. And I'd like to just draw some lessons from this story. But first of all, it doesn't say that this man cried out to him, I don't think. We get that here anywhere. But Jesus observed him, and he simply took compassion upon him. And it says he spit on the ground. And must have just been a little bit, and just took a little bit of earth and made it into clay with his spittle. Kind of gross, actually. And this man could have imagined what was happening here because of Jesus spitting on the ground. He could have thought, well, what's this person doing? But he realized, I believe, who Jesus was. I don't know for sure, but I think by now it was probably very well known that Jesus was healing people, and that all who came in contact with him were touched in some way. So this man may have realized that. But like Naaman, he could have said, well, let's find a different way. Isn't there a better way to do this? And he could have resisted Jesus' actions and said, no, you don't do it this way. He could have asked Jesus to just say a word like he did for some other people, that he would be healed. But we see here that Jesus heals in different ways. I believe Jesus knows exactly what each person needs to display enough of faith to be healed. So he told this man, after he had pasted his eyes shut, some people think maybe this man didn't even have eyeballs, and that he created some with this clay. I don't know, that's just an idea that I read somewhere. But either way, he had to take action. Jesus told him to go, and he obviously believed that something was going on here, and he took action, and he went. He went to the water, he washed, and it says he came out of there seeing. He was able to see. So Jesus knew what this person's level of faith was, and he knew what he needed, or what this blind man needed to do in order to respond to him. And so he heals in different ways. And I think our circumstances will be different as well, and will require different expressions of faith. Again, I'm not trying to suggest that because of a certain infirmity, God is testing your faith, although I think it often can become that. Jesus knows what we can bear. Jesus knows what we can handle. And just like Jesus knew what this person needed to be able to express his faith in him, he knows what you need to be able to express your faith in him in a more full and complete way. So this man was not healed immediately, but he was given the responsibility to go. And his faith was honored by the healing of his eyes. We don't know how old this person was. More than later it says that his parents says he was of age, so possibly he was in his 20s or 30s. We don't know that. But here was a man that from his youth or from his childhood had never seen. And can you imagine? After Jesus pasted the paste over his eyes, and he groped and found his way to the pool, and gets down there and washes it off, and comes out of there is able to see for the first time, probably runs home to his parents, and is able to see his mom and his father for the first time, is able to see the trees, the sun, and daylight, and just people for the very first time. What an amazing thing it must have been. His faith was honored. His stepping out was honored by the healing of his eyes. But it's interesting. Not everybody appreciated what happened here. Sometimes miracles come in ways that do not fit our understanding. And this seems what happened here. So the question this morning and the title of the message, what happens when blind men see? Or we might ask the question, what happens when men believe and are changed? And that's kind of the core of what I want to look at here in the next little bit. What happens when blind men see? Well, first of all, and I'm spiritualizing this in a sense. First of all, this was obvious in this man's life that he was able to see, and there was a spiritual component here that was pressed in upon. But I think this happens in the spiritual sense as well. When people's eyes are open to the truth, when they grab a hold of what of darkness being turned into light, like Romans 8 was talked about this morning, when when the light of Jesus Christ enters into their soul and they can see with their spiritual eyes for the first time, many times there's a response. And I'd like to learn from some of the responses here this morning and look at them in a sense for us today. Well, first of all, I think others will find out. The word gets around, and we see that here. He went out and he started, it wasn't long. I can imagine it wasn't long until people started realizing this man has changed. He was able to see, probably told everybody as he went. The word gets around. And just like when people are saved from their sin and destruction, there is a change, there's a difference. The word gets around. Unfortunately, in this case, it got misrepresented. People ask, well, is this even the same person? Some question. Nobody knew better than the blind man did. And he had to tell them, yes, I am the guy that was the beggar that was begging. I am he. I'm that person. People didn't even quite recognize they couldn't quite come to grips with who he was. So he said, yes, I am he. And he continues to tell the story of what happened to him. So word gets around, and he tells this story, amazing story of what happened to him. And I think it's the same way today. We might say, in a sense, this man became a witness of the power of God. He became the witness of what happened to his eyes, and he started telling people. It's the same way when our eyes are opened spiritually. A witness simply testifies what he knows. And I think in this case here, this man testified of the power of your own story. I remember one of the first times I was at Prison Crusade. I think it was with one of Gospel Express prison crusades. And I remember growing up hearing these glowing stories of men that were saved from the depths of the bondage of sin. And that was not my story at all. We were raised in a very sheltered environment, very sheltered home. Our parents loved the Lord. Our church taught the Bible, and I was never tempted to get into some of the vices of sin of the stories like I heard people around me. But anyway, I remember going into Prison Crusade, and I don't know if it was in a prison. I don't even remember how it was all shared, if it was a prisoner sharing his testimony or what. But I remember the amazement of some of these men when they realized that not everyone follows that same path of sin, and that some people have a chance, or that some people grew up in Christian homes, and they were just amazed by that. It was almost like the story of living in a godly home was so amazing to them, just like we were amazed at the story of God's redemption. And it helped me to see that, you know what, every one of us has a story. Whether we grew up in the vices, all of us have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Don't hear me wrong. But whether we have wasted years like that, or whether we, at an early age, accepted Christ and moved forward with our Christian lives as I think God designed, there is a story that we have. And that story of faithfulness, of hearing God's voice at a young age, of being blessed with that privilege is worth telling. Don't ever think that you don't have a story that is worth telling. Just simply telling people about your experience is powerful. And that's what this man did here. The blind man then was questioned. The questions were, well, how were your eyes open? They wanted to know the details. People want to know. People like to hear the details. Why? I think it's because everyone needs healing. Everyone wants to understand more about this experience of, well, of course, in this case, it was physical healing. They wanted to understand this. And, it's the same way today when people get sick with something and then they're healed, or, maybe God chooses to heal them through a doctor's advice or medication or whatever, but the next person comes along and has some of the same symptoms. We start to tell our stories. We start to tell, well, this has worked for me and this has not worked for me, and so on. We like to know what it is that brings us life in a physical sense. But I think it's true of the spiritual as well. It's good for us to talk to each other about what works, what brings life, what brings healing. And so in a sense, these people were here just asking for the details, wanting to know more about it. Probably they had friends that were blind as well, and they were thinking, well, maybe there's hope for their friends. Everyone needs healing. That's why we like to know the details. We have this yearning within us to know more of what it takes to get healing from the Lord. Everyone needs a touch of Jesus. And if it worked for you, it might work for somebody else. Never forget that. And that's why our stories are so powerful, because it helps us understand what it takes to draw closer to the Lord. Then, of course, there was people that did not appreciate his story that much. And they began questioning the source of the healing. They were questioning who did this and why he did this. And, of course, Jesus had healed this man on the Sabbath day. We know by now that Jesus had run into this several times, and his approach of keeping the Sabbath was not what theirs was. And I was fascinated a little bit with the one comment you made about, Josiah, about the law being corrupted. And I think this is a display of that. The law had been corrupted and taken to a place where it no longer served the people. They had added so many things to it that it didn't serve the people. And even this thing of how to use the Sabbath and what to do and what not to do, they had taken it to an extreme. What Jesus didn't, I believe Jesus kept the law to its fullest, but this was not one of those things that was part of the law, at least not to the extent that they took it. But they used that to come against him and to say it was wrong. They questioned the source of the healing. I think our natural response is to question the source of information, and it should be. People question the authenticity of what happened. Is it real? Who helped you? How did it happen? Some of the same questions we ask today. But the fact of the matter is, and this man knew it, that he was healed. And I think that healing today, whether spiritually or physically, is the same way. When a person finds healing, there is hope. It brings hope. And when a person finds healing, whether it is I just wrote down, whether it's in the barn or in the hospital, it's still healing. And this man was healed in a miraculous, in a different way, but it was healing, and he knew it. The issue simply was that what happened did not fit inside the understanding, the Pharisees' understanding of how things really work. Jesus was breaking the rules of what could happen within their rules of right and wrong. He was breaking their rules, and they just could not come to grips with that. I think there was also a bit of a malicious attempt against Jesus going on here. They were trying to find ways to get rid of him. They were trying to find ways to discredit him, and they simply couldn't do that. And the reason they were doing that was because he was becoming too popular for their liking. He was their system. Their source of income and things like that were being threatened, and so they had to find a way to get rid of him, and this was just another one of those things that they had to discredit. In verse 18, they go to the parents of the blind man. The parents acknowledge their son. They verify the facts, but their parents knew the consequences of openly confessing Jesus, so they deflect the question back to their son. And it's just fascinating. I'm not going to take time to read all of this, but it's fascinating, some of the questions, some of the simple questions they ask. And again, I think this happens today. Sometimes the questions that get asked when people come to faith are so simple, but yet people just don't get it. So they ask the parents, and they deflect it back to the son. In verse 24, it says, "Then again called they the man that was blind, and said unto him, Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner." They did not want to accept what Jesus had done. And they're just coming back to him and saying, "Give God the glory," and trying to put Jesus out of it. And it's sad today how often Jesus is taken out of religion. And when that happens, religion is dangerous, and this is what was happening here as well. We cannot take Jesus out of what we do. And I think when churches do that intentionally or unintentionally, take Jesus out of their presentation, take Jesus out of their message, things go downhill and things don't make sense. This is exactly what was happening here. It just simply did not line up. It did not make sense. And they had to go against, I'm sure, what was some of their better understanding to disprove Jesus, because they could not fit him in to their understanding, into their category of how things should be. So they came back to the healed man again and asked him, well, really, how was this? And I just love his response. The healed man here clearly shares his confession of faith in Jesus, being from God. And in a sense, it brought them to a point of decision. I just want to read some of this. Verse 26. Then said they to him again, what did he do to thee? How opened he his eyes? After already being told. He answered them, I have told you already, and ye did not hear. Wherefore would ye hear it again? Will ye also be his disciples? He brought them to a point of decision. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to be his disciples as well? Then they reviled him and said, thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciple. We know that God spake unto Moses. As for this fellow, we know not from whence he is. The man answered and said unto them, why, herein is a marvelous thing, that ye know not from whence he is, and yet he hath opened mine eyes. Now we know that God heareth not sinners. But if any man be a worshipper of God, and doth his will, him he heareth. Since the world began, was it not heard that any man opened the eyes of one that was born blind? If this man were not of God, he could do nothing. And so he simply lays it out. If this man were of God, he could do nothing. And I think many times when we question the authenticity of people's experience, it would be so much better if we would just back off and say, allow God to reveal whether this is real or not. And time usually tells whether things are of God. Well, this blind man was simply telling them that this had to be of God, because this is not normal, and what happened to me is not normal. And he was basically confessing his belief in God, in Jesus. Although it feels like he didn't even fully know who Jesus was. It says in 34, they answered and said unto him, thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? And they cast him out. And so they're saying, you're a sinful person. In spite of the obvious evidence that he had, that he saw, he could physically see them for the first time, he was a changed person. They were saying, something is wrong with you. And I don't know how many of you have experienced that here this morning, but I believe that there's too many people today that are coming out of situations where you've seen the light and everything is so clear to you, but people around you don't understand who you are because of what you have within. And they want to discredit it. And while I think the temptation is to react to cultures, to things around us that may respond in this way to the clear teachings of Jesus, I think it's good for us to just be able to let those things go and continue to look to Jesus. And so I just want to encourage you this morning, if that has been your experience where you've accepted the light of Jesus in ways and enlightenment has come to you, yet you experience just oppression from people that should be for you, I just want to encourage you to let it go and let your life speak for itself like this man did. Let your life speak for who you are. I believe others will eventually come to know and understand the intentions and the burdens of your heart. This is just a powerful example of how that can work and happen. Jesus then heard what had happened to this man and how he was cast out. When he found him, he said unto this person, this man, dost thou believe on the Son of God? And I just want to read these last several verses here and make several conclusions in closing. Verse 35, dost thou believe on the Son of God? He answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him? And Jesus said unto him, thou hast both seen him, and it is he that talketh with thee. And he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. And Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be made blind. And some of the Pharisees which were with him heard these words, and said unto him, are we blind also? Jesus said unto them, if ye were blind, ye should have no sin. But now ye say, we see, therefore your sin remaineth. So in conclusion, I have 3 points I want to draw from this. The first one is, when blind men see, they will speak of their faith, even though they do not fully understand the power of how they were healed. So don't shut up, but speak of your faith, but do it discreetly. like this man did. Don't say more than you need to say, but don't say less than you need to say either. Speak of your faith. Speak of Jesus. The second point, when blind men see, they will acknowledge Jesus and worship. What a beautiful picture. He knew something had happened, but he didn't fully understand until Jesus explained to him here, after he saw. And when he realized, it says, Lord, when he realized what was happening here, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped. When blind men see, they will acknowledge Jesus and worship. I think it's so important that we continually do this as people. Whether we were saved yesterday, last week, last year, 10 years ago, or 50 years ago. Let's be like this blind man was. Continue to acknowledge him and worship. Finally, in verse 41, Jesus reveals the spiritual pride and conceit of self-righteousness. It produces exactly what self-righteousness seeks to eliminate: sin. So it's kind of maybe a bit of a play on words here what Jesus did, but these Pharisees came. They had overheard this, and they asked a simple question, well, are we blind? And Jesus said, if ye were blind, ye should have no sin. But now ye say, we see, therefore your sin remaineth. Jesus reveals their spiritual pride and conceit of self-righteousness. It produces exactly what self-righteousness seeks to eliminate. So in our self-righteousness, we seek to eliminate sin only to be at a place where that self-righteousness becomes the most abhorrent sin that Jesus hates: sin. The third point I have is blind men always realize they cannot see by themselves and need the cleansing power of Jesus to see. We cannot see by ourselves. We need the cleansing power of Jesus to see. God, help us to be people that realize our blindness, but that then come to Jesus and have the experience that this blind person had. When blind men see, wonderful things can happen. Let's pray. Father, I thank you this morning for the story of this blind man and how he was brought to physical healing and then spiritual healing. God, I just pray that each one of us could recognize the blindness and the disparity of our own souls and bring it to you so that we too could